Hey everybody, it is Tuesday, June 10th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu here. This is the place where we bring you just the facts and we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. As you're probably realizing by now, it's just me today, solo on this pod. No Jill Wagner. She will be back on Thursday, and I will be headed on vacation tomorrow. And so tomorrow we'll actually have a podcast for you, a special interview edition of the pod on all things creator culture, business, entrepreneurship in the modern social media era. So no regular daily pod. That'll be back on Thursday when Jill is back solo, and then she'll be taking you through the week as well as next week. She might have some special guests. I am headed abroad. My wife and I are headed on a trip to Japan in the next day. Very much looking forward to that. I've only gotten to go to Japan as a journalist covering various things like the Fukushima nuclear meltdown. So looking forward to being a tourist in Japan, unplugging to the extent that that's possible these days. If you're interested in learning more about my trip, following us along as we make our way through Japan over the next week and a half, head over to the Mo News Premium Instagram page. That's where I often share our travels. Those of you who've been with us for a while will remember our trips to Morocco, Tanzania, Rwanda, Egypt, Israel over on the Mo News Premium page. And so we'll do behind the scenes content, history, fun facts, and cool places to check out during our travels in Japan for the next 2 weeks. So if you're not a premium member already, make sure to join over at mo.news/premium. Again, I'll be gone tomorrow. There will be an interview edition of the podcast. And then Thursday, Jill is back. But rest assured, the team is in place. The Instagram page will remain live, the main Instagram news feed, thanks to Lauren and the team. The newsletter will also continue to be put out daily every afternoon. So if you're not already signed up for that, make sure to subscribe to the Mo newsletter over at Substack. And so coverage continues. I'll see you guys towards the end of the month. But before I go, here I am with my final daily edition of the podcast. A lot that we're following, especially on the West Coast. And as I record this late on Monday, we'll continue to watch developments, but there might be some new developments in the morning already, given the overnight hours and the time difference with the West Coast. We will begin this podcast with the latest escalation in LA as President Trump decided Monday afternoon to mobilize several hundred Marines to LA. It's unclear what their mission is going to be, but it does come after the decision to send 2,000 National Guard troops to the streets of LA over the weekend after those immigration raids led to violent protests over the weekend. The California governor, Gavin Newsom, has filed suit over the decision. I'll have the latest on that. We're also looking at today's podcast at the talks happening in London this week between top U.S. officials and Chinese officials trying to settle that tariff war between the world's two largest economies. In the Middle East, activist Greta Thunberg and her friends didn't get far in their attempt to reach Gaza, stopped by Israeli forces on the water yesterday. I'll tell you what the Israelis are apparently making the activists watch before they deport them from the country. We're monitoring developments at the Health and Human Services Department as RFK Jr. has removed all members of the CDC panel that advises on U.S. vaccines, what he says that's all about, and the response. The largest Protestant denomination in the U.S. is meeting this week, what they're pushing for the Supreme Court to do in regards to gay marriage. Another legacy media company is splitting amid the streaming turmoil that is taking over the business. And we'll have the headlines from Apple's Keynote yesterday. You might have been monitoring these headlines, hoping for big announcements. It's not clear we got that much. I'll tell you what we did get. And of course, I'll have On This Day in History for all of you. All right, let's begin with the latest on the West Coast of Southern California, where approximately 700 U.S. Marines were mobilized on Monday to support the National Guard in L.A. amid these anti-ICE protests. Hours before, California sued the Trump administration for deploying initially those 2,000 National Guard troops there without the consent of the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. So there's 2,000 Guard troops, now followed by 700 Marines. Under Trump's orders, the Guard troops have been told to remain there for roughly 60 days to help disperse protesters. So far, it looks like only a couple hundred of the National Guardsmen have been deployed so far. We're still trying to get a sense of what their actual mission is, given that for the purposes of the streets handling the protests, that is very much on the LAPD, LA sheriffs, as well as the California Highway Patrol. Now, the decision here to deploy Marines, very escalatory by the president. Now, they do say, at least as of Monday, that this is a temporary move until National Guard troops arrive. But remember that Marines are trained to deal with enemies abroad, not domestic matters. Now, there have been a handful of examples in American history where this has happened, most recently in LA back in the early 90s during the Rodney King riots. At that time, the governor asked for the president, George H.W. Bush at that time, to bring in help, given widespread rioting that was taking place, much more significant than what we've been seeing so far in LA this go around. This time it's different because Trump is deciding to do this on his own against the will of state and local authorities. This all follows the raids we told you about yesterday that ICE started, Immigration and Customs Enforcement started back on Friday, arresting more than 100 undocumented migrants in a variety of raids, including workplaces, a store in the Fashion District, nearby a Home Depot parking lot, a donut shop. And that has really spurred people to the streets because until now, for the most part, the focus has been on criminals. They've really ratcheted things up in recent weeks at the behest of the president and his advisors, who very much want to see deportation numbers up. And that means going after people, not with criminal records, but frankly, anybody who's in the country, regardless of how long they've been here, whether they were trying to go through process legitimately, whether they pay taxes, and regardless of whether any of them have committed crimes over the course of the past few years or decades. So that is now spurring people who are saying these are members of the community. We have to find a way to keep them in the country, and treating them like criminals is unacceptable. It also disincentivizes people to actually go through the process as they see that other folks that have tried to go through the process legitimately, if they're denied asylum, immediately arrested and thrown in jail and deported. Now, the majority of the protests so far, as we've told you, have been peaceful, but a number of them have turned violent. A number of Waymo cars, those are the self-driving taxis, lit on fire. A number of law enforcement vehicles effectively destroyed on the 101 on Sunday, as in some cases, some of these demonstrators were dropping cinder blocks and trying to light these police cars on fire. The protests, at least as of Monday afternoon, relatively calm, but late at night, we know that that's when things escalate. So we'll watch what happened overnight and what the reaction is today. Anti-ICE demonstrations now spreading beyond California here to several dozen locations across the country. So we're talking San Francisco, Sacramento, Houston, San Antonio, Chicago, and New York, where activists are now rallied and incentivized to protest given what they're seeing unfold in LA here. As of Monday afternoon, organizers have now scheduled demonstrations in nearly every major city. That all signals a growing backlash here to the Trump administration's immigration enforcement tactics and the deployment of the National Guard. Now, as far as the White House is concerned, they didn't like the violence that they saw unfold, at least those violent incidents unfold on Friday and Saturday. And so the president being super aggressive here in deploying the National Guard. The response from California Governor Gavin Newsom and the mayor of LA has been, this is only escalating things further and creating even more protests and violent demonstrations. And so they blame what happened, especially on Sunday, on the president. Gavin Newsom really going with multiple messages here, calling for people not to commit violence, but saying, at the end of the day, this is all President Trump's fault. President Trump saying, nope, this is your inability to get your state under control. Now, when it comes to how Trump is pursuing enforcement here, there are a number of questions legally, especially as of this recording. He has not invoked a law called the Insurrection Act, which means he's very limited in terms of what he can do with National Guard troops and Marines domestically. Again, the military is meant for abroad, not domestic, unless you invoke this 1807 law called the Insurrection Act, which allows the president at the time of insurrection to use the military domestically. The president has not invoked that and actually went so far yesterday as to joke, sort of joking, that the governor of California should be arrested. There is no love lost between these two men, Newsom and Donald Trump. Here was Newsom's response to what Trump was saying.
The hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with. Tough guy. I don't give a damn. But I care about my community. I care about this community.
Reporters apparently asked Trump about that, and he said that whatever needs to be done, he will do. We'll have to watch what unfolds here. I don't anticipate an arrest of the governor of California here, but the week is young, and certainly President Trump is looking to look very aggressive here, look like he's taking control of the situation. He believes that's the only way to go here, and he doesn't want to be in a situation like in 2020 where you follow the guidance of governors when it comes to National Guard deployment. This go around, Trump is doing this on his own. And that's going to lead to a legal battle here because the California Attorney General filed a lawsuit against Trump for taking control of the state's National Guard over the weekend. They say legally, constitutionally, he was not allowed to do that, given that he didn't invoke this 1807 law. And so we will watch this unfold in the courts here. In the meantime, what's very interesting is the use of certain terminology by Trump in the last day. Take a listen to how Trump described the protests Monday afternoon at the White House.
People that are causing the problem are professional agitators, they're insurrectionists, they're bad people, they should be in jail. Thank you.
The use of the term insurrectionist there, obviously chosen on purpose, echoing how the rioters on January 6th were referred to as insurrectionists by many Democrats and Republicans. Trump, though, taken to advocating for those January 6th rioters, never wanted to call them insurrectionists. He gave them all pardons earlier this year. But now he's referring to what's happening, specifically the violence in LA, as insurrectionists. There's a reason for that I'll tell you about in a second, but first the definition of insurrectionist. It is a person who engages in or supports a rebellion against a government in power or the civil authorities. Hence why on January 6th, they talked about those people trying to basically change the results of the election as insurrectionists. This go around, he's referring to the people engaged in violence against the authorities, ICE authorities, and their law enforcement attempts to arrest undocumented migrants as insurrectionists. This has legal ramifications because, as I told you, he has not yet invoked the Insurrection Act of 1807. But he's trying to set the stage here. So the fact that he's using the term insurrectionist, he may be laying the groundwork for invoking this law, and if it hasn't been invoked already overnight. As for this lawsuit, we'll see how this unfolds. Officials arguing Trump overstepped his authority here by taking control of the National Guard. We haven't seen that, everyone, since 1965. We have to go back to Lyndon Johnson, the civil rights demonstrations in Alabama, where the governor at the time wouldn't deploy the National Guard to support black protesters and defend black protesters. And so Lyndon Johnson, the president, got involved and overrode the state's wishes at that time. So we have not seen this in 60 years. Obviously, again, some of these examples I've brought up, Rodney King, 65, much more significant, widespread demonstrations of violence than we have seen now. Not to minimize some of the incidents we have seen, though. We've posted the pictures from downtown LA, broken barricades, burned cars, a number of cars on fire, some of those police vehicles on the 101 destroyed by some of the more violent demonstrators over the weekend. There have been a number of arrests, nearly 200 arrests. In some cases, by the way, journalists getting hit in the crossfire here. We posted a clip yesterday of Australian journalist Lauren Tomasi. She was one of several journalists injured. She was hit directly by a rubber bullet. And you actually see a law enforcement officer turn his gun towards the reporter in that video. You can check it out over on Instagram. So more than 200 arrests so far in the violence, in the escalating violence between protesters and law enforcement here. Notably, 42, at least as of this recording, of the undocumented migrants who have been rounded up by ICE in the past couple of days are Mexican nationals. The Mexican president chimed in on this in the last day, President Claudia Sheinbaum. She spoke out saying, "We cannot intervene in the politics of the United States." She asked U.S. officials to respect the rule of law and the human rights of the detainees. And she urged the Mexican community who may be protesting these actions that burning patrol cars seems more an act of provocation than of resistance. Notably, a number of the images, videos, you see people waving Mexican flags, sometimes just within a few feet of some of these burning vehicles and some of the violence. The Mexican president chiming in here saying, "We want nothing to do with that, and we call on you to stop doing that." So a lot developing in this situation. We're going to watch what develops overnight in cities across America as protests lit up. As I told you guys yesterday, this has a shot of being a version of 2020. I don't see it going as significant or as violent as it did in 2020, but things are still early here. And certainly Trump trying to showcase his power, showcase his strength, and trying to utilize these protests to reinforce his point here. He's also trying to put Democrats in a corner of defending these actions. Some Democrats trying to nuance here, saying we don't like what ICE is doing in terms of going after workplace enforcement, going beyond criminals when it comes to undocumented migrants, rounding them up. They see them as valuable members of the society. There should be a route to citizenship for a number of them. But then they also, Democrats, are trying to condemn the violence. Trump is trying to paint them all in one corner. And it's interesting because then when you talk to Democrats, they are trying to talk about this abuse of power from Trump. At the same time, some of these people he's rounding up, undocumented migrants, certainly have criminal records, violent criminal records, and they've been deported for that reason. But then a number of them no criminal records. Some of them have been working here for decades. And so there's a number of, stories, depending on where you look and who you hear the news from, that you get. But trying to give you a comprehensive picture of what is unfolding here. But certainly the White House moving very quickly here. And we're seeing things we haven't seen in decades. So we're going to monitor all of that, as well as the court battles and on the street and in the media in LA and across the country. All right, let's get to today's speed read. First, we begin in the Wall Street Journal, where there's an op-ed piece by RFK Jr., the Health and Human Services Secretary. And in that op-ed, he announced yesterday that he is retiring all 17 members of an advisory committee on immunization at the CDC. He says the move will restore the public's trust in vaccines. When I say he retired them, he effectively fired them. Now, I should note the CDC's vaccine advisors have a lot of influence. They carefully review data on vaccines. They debate the evidence and vote on who should get the shots and when. Insurance companies are required to cover all the vaccines recommended by this panel. So their moves, significant here. Now, the fact that Kennedy is getting rid of the entire panel here, this is significant, not surprising, but significant. We know that RFK Jr., very much a vaccine skeptic. He has said he wanted to reshape policy when it comes to immunizations. And so he is looking at redoing the vaccine panel with a number of members aligned more with his views. It has the potential here to significantly alter immunizations recommended to Americans, including the immunizations we give our children. Kennedy said that the panel, which is officially called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, has been, quote, plagued with persistent conflicts of interest. He argued in the op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal that the public must know that unbiased science guides the recommendations from our health agencies. This will ensure the American people receive the safest vaccines possible. Now, he has previously claimed that 97% of the members of the vaccine group there had what he said were financial conflicts of interest. Now, that stat actually dates back 16 years. A review recently found that the majority of the conflicts actually were due to facts like missing dates, missing information, or information in the wrong section, not significant financial conflicts. Nonetheless, RFK using this as an excuse to dump everybody. Members have said that in cases where there were indirect conflicts of interest, for example, if a member of that committee was doing work for an organization that received money from a drug manufacturer, they would disclose that, and then they wouldn't vote on that due to conflicts of interest. Kennedy, not really looking at the details here, very much says, I want a blank slate. I want to start from scratch. And by doing this in the way he did it, it allows him to appoint people now as opposed to waiting till 2028, which is when the Trump administration, if it followed previous procedure, would have been able to appoint new people. That would have been very late in the administration. So here we have a case where RFK is starting from scratch. Again, not surprising, but still a lot of folks speaking out in the medical establishment, members speaking anonymously, but also doctors and prominent public health officials who are very concerned about the move here. One committee member speaking anonymously to the New York Times who lost their job, saying, quote, providers are no longer going to follow the CDC vaccination schedule. The CDC has lost credibility in the vaccination space. It adds a lot of uncertainty for care for children and adults. Paul Offit, who is a former member of the committee and one of the developers of the vaccine that protects against the rotavirus, was much more aggressive in his commentary. He said the committee's work over decades has markedly improved the health of children and adults in this country, and RFK is putting that at risk here. All right, our next story comes to us from Reuters. The U.S. and China will continue trade talks today after 6 hours of discussions yesterday between major officials took place in London. These talks expected to continue to focus on easing tensions between China and the U.S. and the fact that each country right now is using what it supplies the other as a leverage point to get a better deal. By that, I mean China exports most of the world's rare earth minerals. These are crucial minerals that we use in EVs, computers, a number of important equipment, and they've been looking at curbing that. And that is not replaceable. So China's been using that as a leverage point. Meanwhile, the U.S. dominates the world in ethane. That's a gas used to make plastics. China buys nearly all of it. China makes most of our plastic things, all of our plastic things in the world. And so the U.S. was like, all right, we will block you from this key element that goes into plastic. So the two of them using those things they manufacture and things they export as leverage points here. Over in London right now, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, they referred to the meetings yesterday with the Chinese as a good meeting and fruitful, respectively. And Trump chimed in yesterday saying, China's not easy, but we're making some good progress. Now, China has not officially commented on the talks. They have been much less optimistic than some of the U.S. statements of late. But this all follows our tariff war escalation in recent months, and then the relative calm, but no real permanent deal here. Frankly, we have no trade deal with anybody yet. The U.S. concurrently negotiating with 70 plus countries at the moment on the various deals. So we are waiting on actual final deals. We have seen an outline of a deal with the UK, very general guidance here between the U.S. and China, but still a lot of details to be worked out. And we will monitor headlines out of London today to see whether there's any more announcements. All right, our next story out of the Middle East from The Guardian. The Israeli military on Monday took control of a boat of activists that included a Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg that they say was going to deliver some food to Palestinians in Gaza. They took this boat from Italy, were hoping to reach Gaza. The Israeli Navy cut them off yesterday. The group of activists, about a dozen of them, were on a boat called the Madleen. It was a symbolic attempt to try to break the naval blockade of Gaza. Early on Monday morning in the Mediterranean, they put out the last communication saying they had been boarded by the Israeli Navy. And to put out word, they actually put out a series of pre-recorded messages through their phones in the water. There's video of this. And then ultimately the Israelis boarded. Here's a bit of that pre-recorded message from Greta Thunberg.
If you see this video, we have been intercepted and kidnapped in international waters.
The Israeli Foreign Ministry said the crew was being taken to Israel. They offered them drinks and sandwiches and then put out photos of it and then brought them to port. There's an image going around of Greta Thunberg smiling, being offered a sandwich by a member of the Israeli military. Israel said they looked at the aid on the ship. They said they were carrying less than 1 truckload of aid on the boat. Or I should say, the Israelis are calling it a selfie yacht. They mocked it. The Israelis said that they will take that aid to Gaza. But ultimately, they view this as a group of celebrities that were just in it for their own promotion. The Israeli defense minister, his name is Israel Katz, congratulating the Israeli military on a quick and safe takeover of the boat. He said they were bringing the individuals, the activists, to port, and they were going to make them watch a video of the October 7th attacks, what Hamas did to Israeli civilians on that day, to, quote, see exactly who the Hamas terrorist organization they came to support and for whom they work is and atrocities they commit. It's not clear that they work for Hamas or have been coordinating with Hamas, but ultimately that was part of the Israeli PR statement there. Nonetheless, there were chants of F Israel on the boat ride to Gaza. And this group has been vehemently critical of Israel, its ability to exist as a Jewish country, a variety of things. So the Israeli military and Israeli government, no love for this group. And they view Thunberg, who's been a climate activist until now, as an opportunist, they say. But at the same time, Thunberg saying, no, I am in it for humanitarian reasons. I very much care about the Palestinians. In Gaza, as we've told you, there's about 2 million plus Palestinians. The majority of them have been displaced by the war, and a number of them living in camps right now. The Israelis had cut off food and humanitarian aid for a couple of months. They were trying to ratchet up pressure on Hamas. That was not that effective. They recently reopened aid, but that has been very haphazard in the past few days, as we've told you. All right, our next story from the Associated Press. The Southern Baptist Convention is meeting today and tomorrow in Dallas, Texas. The meeting is often regarded as a bellwether for the broader evangelical movement on various political and cultural issues because Southern Baptists are the largest Protestant denomination in the U.S. At the top of the agenda, approving a resolution calling for a reversal of the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage. Southern Baptists have long opposed gay marriage, but this week's vote will be the first time they're asking the representatives and the churches to work actively to end it. Remember, the Supreme Court ruled back in 2022 to overturn Roe v. Wade, and it appears here that some activists are hoping the church can work against the 2015 decision that made gay marriage legal for everyone in the country. Beyond that resolution, they're also expected to debate resolutions on sports betting, banning pornography, supporting policies that they say promote childbearing, as well as several others. There's a proposed ban on churches that have female pastors, and there's a move to possibly defund the organization's public policy arm because it has opposed state laws that criminalize women seeking abortions. Translation, there are people in the movement who want to criminalize women who seek abortion. So we're going to closely watch these meetings, see how they vote on this. But this has been particularly controversial in recent years. You have seen individual churches leaving the larger convention as it's made this move to the right. And there are a number of notable Southern Baptists at high ranks of government right now. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is a Southern Baptist. He's second in line for the presidency, of course, behind the vice president. And as far as numbers are concerned, I mentioned the Southern Baptists are the largest Protestant denomination in the U.S. Their membership levels have been declining for about 2 decades now, but they still have about 13 million members, which is more than any other Protestant group here in the U.S. All right, now to some entertainment and media news from Variety magazine. Warner Brothers Discovery said yesterday it's planning to divide the company into 2 parts. 2 publicly traded entities, one devoted to streaming and one devoted to traditional television. So on the streaming side, the streaming and studio side, they're calling it, Warner Brothers Television, Warner Brothers Motion Picture Group, DC Studios, HBO, and HBO Max will all be in that group. That's the part they feel will continue to grow in the coming years. Then there's the other company they're calling Global Networks. This will include Discovery TV, TNT Sports, Discovery Plus Streaming, Bleacher Report, and CNN. Warner has had to contend with a number of obstacles in recent years, dealing with the fact that cable continues to see cord cutting and continues to become a smaller and smaller part of the business, while streaming and content production continues to be big. HBO Max has seen a lot of success lately with The Pitt and White Lotus, and so they looked at dividing the company up. They're not the first ones to do this. Comcast did it in the last year. We told you about it, NBC Universal slicing the company in 2 parts, and they have a company they effectively call SpinCo, or have called SpinCo, where they sent off a number of the cable entities. So think USA, CNBC, MSNBC, as they too see cable as a smaller and smaller part of the business, and they want to preserve the core growing part of the business, Peacock, and the main NBC network. All right, to some tech news now from USA Today. Apple held its annual keynote address on Monday. Honestly, not that much news out of it. If you were looking for major advancements, major announcement when it comes to artificial intelligence, especially, we've been waiting for Apple to really catch up with what they're calling Apple Intelligence, their version of AI. And we haven't seen much progress there. In fact, they're behind initial announcement deadlines and initial goals here. Apple remains under pressure to deliver on the promise of Apple Intelligence here, because they announced all these really cool features last year we told you about, and they haven't reached us yet. Apple CEO Tim Cook said on the company's most recent earnings call that Apple Intelligence hasn't yet met the company's high quality bar to be released to customers. And so we're still waiting on that in this race between Microsoft, Meta, Google, and everyone's version of their AI. Now, what we did see yesterday was a glimpse of the new iOS, which is designed to lay the groundwork for what they say is the 2027 iPhone redesign, 2027 being significant because it'll be the 20th birthday of the iPhone, first released back in 2007. So yesterday was really about design. It was about adding this new transparent aesthetic to tabs, files, app icons. It's going to allow Safari in this new interface they rolled out yesterday to cover an entire page. So the web page will cover an entire page with the tab bar disappearing. So really just aesthetic things. They're referring to this design as what they call liquid glass. So that, sounds super cool, but it's really just a design element here. Now, one of the interesting things that did get my attention yesterday was this new live translation feature they say will be available for AirPods, where they can detect speech in one language and then translate and read the message to the wearer in another language. So apparently we will soon reach the stage here, Apple believes, of live translation into your ear using AirPods. AirPods will also now have the ability to act as a remote shutter button for your iPhone's camera and have an auto pause feature that shuts off your music or podcast if you fall asleep while listening. So it'll detect whether you're sleeping, and then they'll be able to pause the music, save your battery life, and save you from being woken up by your music if you pass out while listening. But back to the AI thing, that's going to be super important for Apple here. That's where growth is going to be. That's what ultimately shareholders, traders, everyone looking at Apple here, they tried to make their virtual goggles a big thing. They've really tried to revamp the watch in recent years, but none of them have really taken the market by storm. And so they've had these sort of incremental redesign features, slight tweaks to the iPhone, but many folks seeing the growth of AI here, especially versus search, as key. And so Apple does have some deals with OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT. We'll see if they continue to develop their own thing. It appears they are for now, versus going with one of the more successful AI products that are out there. All right, we end here with On This Day in History. On this day in 1752, Benjamin Franklin flew that kite in a thunderstorm. You probably heard about this. You might remember this from grade school. The experiment, though, not entirely as it's often depicted, flying a kite in a lightning storm to try to prove electricity. It's not clear he was trying to prove that, And it's not clear that he was actually struck by lightning, because if he was struck by lightning, he would have probably died. And Benjamin Franklin would go on to live decades more after that experiment, but he did do an experiment related to lightning. We do know that, and we believe it happened on this day in 1752. All right, on this day in 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issues an executive order making Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills of South Dakota part of the National Park Service. On this day in 1963, President John F. Kennedy signs into law the Equal Pay Act of 1963, aimed at eliminating wage disparities based on gender. Unfortunately, we still deal with that to a certain extent today. On this day in 1977, back to Apple, the Apple II personal computer was first introduced. On this day nearly 50 years ago, that's how old the personal computer is. And we end with a bit of pop culture history. Turning 31 years old today, pop quiz hotshot. What movie came out? I'll give you a few seconds. Those of you who have seen the film would know the movie is Speed with Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock, and Dennis Hopper. It premiered on this day, June 10th, 1994. And it's been 18 years since we said goodbye to The Sopranos. On this day in 2007, the Sopranos series finale on HBO aired, and we still miss that show and miss James Gandolfini on this day in history. And a personal note here on this day in 2020, I proposed to Alex. She said yes. It happened in Central Park. It was a surprise. And it was still one of those early COVID days. We couldn't actually celebrate at a restaurant at that time because everything was still closed in those first few months of COVID. But we were able to celebrate, get married the following year. And I love you very much, Alex, on this day in history. And by the way, I did it on June 10th, partially because it had some significance to me, because on June 10th, 1995, 30 years ago today, I became a bar mitzvah, the Jewish rite of passage for young men at 13 years old, where you read a portion of the Bible, the Torah, at a synagogue, and then, especially here in the U.S., have a very big party. So on this day 30 years ago, I had my bar mitzvah, and on this day 5 years ago, I proposed to my wife. All right, enough about me. I'll let you go on with your day. I'm going to miss all you. We're going to have an episode again, an interview episode tomorrow, and then Jill will be back with the daily episodes, covering the daily news on Thursday. And I will see you guys back here on June 23rd, a week from Monday. But I know that you are in good hands with the Mo News team on Instagram, on the newsletter, and on this podcast. But if you miss me, make sure to become a premium member over at mo.news/premium, where I'll be sharing bits from the vacation over the next 2 weeks. Always fun as I learn about the country, learn about the history of the country, the news of the country, and let you in behind the scenes. All right. I'll see you guys back here soon. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.